Efendim ben Sami Altınkaya, Stüdyo Avrupa'da karşınızdayız. Bugün Ekotürk Televizyonu Avrupa temsilcimiz sevgili Gökhan Kurtaran önemli bir röportaj yaptı. Bu özel röportaj 74 yaşındaki dünyaca ünlü yatırım gurusu Dr. Marc Faber tarafından gerçekleştirildi. Faber'la yapılan bu röportaj Batı ekonomilerinin çöküş sürecine girdiği ve Türkiye'nin yönünü Asya'ya çevirmesinin daha faydalı olacağı açıklamalar var. Bu açıklamaların detaylarını sevgili Gökhan Kurtaran'ın röportajında ayrıntılarıyla izleyeceksiniz. Sizi şimdi bu röportajla baş başa bırakıyorum. Ondan sonra Lale Elmacıoğlu sizlerle birlikte olacak efendim.
Marc, welcome to Ekotürk. It's a pleasure to have you.
It's a pleasure for me and a great honor to be on your channel.
Thank you very much. I will start with the uncertainty in this world, the world that we're living in since January, especially. There has been a lot going on, and especially the global slowdown and concern about the growth and in US, EU, China. What is your projection? What are we going through exactly right now?
I think there's always uncertainty in markets because if there is no uncertainty, the markets are very expensive. You understand? The uncertainty creates opportunities because it depresses some sectors that then come to life. But in general, I think that obviously the geopolitical conditions have deteriorated. Number two, the economic prospects of the world. And here I have to specify, when I talk about the world, I talk about the typical household of normal people, because there are two economies. The economies of the rich that have assets, they have benefited from the concentration of wealth is enormous among few people and a few companies, and then the broad market, the broad economy is not doing well. So we have to be very careful when we talk about an economy. Who do we address and what are we talking about? And then there are economies that are growing actually rather rapidly at the present time. So I'd say India, as an example, is still growing. China is still growing, but at a slower rate. And other economies, they're moving into recession, or they have been in recession for a very long time. So we have to distinguish and be very specific about different countries and different sectors.
Yes, and the other thing is, I'm also wondering is like that we are seeing that some of these uncertainties and geopolitical risk seems like the balance of power has been changing for a while. The world that we're living in now, it seems like advanced economies are not really doing well and they're struggling. And on the other hand, we've got emerging nations, emerging economies, which are not really equally or fairly represented in institutions, global institutions.
Yes, what you're saying is absolutely right. When I started to work in 1970, the world consisted mostly of Europe and America, economically speaking. There were maybe 80% of the world's economies. And nowadays, they are, first of all, a small portion of the world's population, maybe only around 12%. And the emerging world, including China and India and so forth, constrains economic growth and essentially prevents prosperity.
Well,
yes, we are in a totally different world. And the problem is that US policymakers and some Westerners in Britain, for instance, they haven't realized it yet. Britain is no longer a world power. India is a larger economy than Britain, is overtaken Britain. This is a shock that some people don't understand in the Western world.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, we see that the very forefront, the defenders of the free market, free world, is being a lot more protectionist. And they almost like when they see like China, for example, or other emerging economies doing better, maybe, they want to change of the rules while during the game.
Yes, you're absolutely right. They have become defensive because they can see that other powers or countries are becoming economically more important. And of course, they have also more geopolitical influence around the world. Say, Brazil exports much more to China than to the US. So there are trading links that are being forged between new countries. I'd say Turkey one day will be closer to Asia than to the Western world. Or I hope so.
Well, that's
So.
a very important question, because we know the Turkey's like EU accession process, which took years from 1960s up until now. But at the same time, there are new sources of power that are appearing in the world as well. We talk about BRICS. And do you think, and also I'd like you to add on top of that as well, Turkey has been trying to mediate between Russia and Ukraine conflict and some other geopolitical conflicts as well. And do you think that Turkey is turning into some kind of like soft power, or does Turkey have other alternatives now?
Yes, I think Turkey has many more alternatives than ever before. And it may be good that Turkey doesn't join the EU. It may be more favorable for Turkey to be in the alignment of BRICS countries for trade and for economic development. So I think that actually Turkey has been very badly treated by the EU. If you compare, say, the EU, who wants to include Ukraine into the EU, but they made it very difficult for Turkey to ever join the EU, when Turkey would have been a wonderful country to be included in the EU in every respect.
Yep, and also recently, like we've seen that Europe has started to feel quite alienated, like after relying on NATO for so long, and after the frictions between Donald Trump and EU, now they feel that they need to develop their own defense system. And in the last couple of months, we are seeing quite like closer relations between Turkey and EU, especially when it comes to defense.
Yes, I'm sure that the EU would love to have Turkey on board, especially also because of people who could essentially boost the size of the Western army military power. But my sense is that Turkey should be very careful in aligning itself with clearly a declining world power. The Western power is a declining power in every respect. And I would be very careful as a politician, and I'm an economist, I'm not a politician, and I'm investing money, but I would be very careful to align myself with a geographical area that is losing its power.
It's a great statement and very interesting. Thank you for that. And I'd like to add on top of that is also you have been criticizing the way that the advanced economies, the Western world, let's say, have been piling up the debt and literally sitting on the top of a mountain of debt. And in UK now, it's almost like close to 100% of the GDP. It's 96%. And I don't even know how it's going to be funded. And the same story goes on for US and in Italy. That's what we see. And how do you think it is going to go? Like at what extent it can be manageable?
You answered the question already. You said, we don't know how it's going to be funded. That is the question. How do they fund it? In my view, we are at the stage in economic development in Western democracies where they must keep on printing money. They must increase the quantity of paper money so they can buy the debts that the government is issuing. The Western democracies spend too much and don't collect enough taxes. The result is a tax occurs as a result of rising inflation. It's also in Turkey. We have high inflation rates in Turkey. This is a tax on people. And it's going to happen in the US. The problem in the US and in Europe is that, in particular in the US, the bond market is very large. So it's not likely that the bond market will rally a lot, even if we have a recession. And then the interest payments on the debt is the fastest growing expenditure in the US within the government expenditures. And so the government debt payments, the interest payments annually, they go up every year. And that will become a problem because one day all the taxes that are collected will be paid out in interest on the debt. And that will lead, in my opinion, to very high inflation rates. And that's why I've warned about this for the last 40 years, but I also said for the last 40 years, you cannot trust Western central banks anymore. You've got to be your own central banker, and you've got to own gold, silver, and platinum.
Yes, and I remember from our previous interviews as well, you always emphasize the importance of gold, because in the old world,
Yes.
the money was backed by gold, but yet
Yes.
it is not anymore. So it's just money printing.
Trump is a present of God for people who own gold. He's going to print money, and he's going to pile up debts like never before. He's a present for people who own precious metals.
Not that good for the people who are relying on the currencies. There's also, we've seen there's talks of like reserve currency talks, like the European Central Bank is saying that now the euro is getting more valued against dollar, so it might be reserve currency. Recently, according to the polls, Reform UK, which is known to be anti-immigrant, Nigel Farage-led quite political movement, happens to be the third party in the last election. And now, according to the poll, it has the majority, it would have the majority if there was a general election in UK. And then we see the similar movements in Europe as well. The more protectionism, more problems, and top of that, anti-immigrant rhetoric, which is probably not helping for countries with low birth and low growth. And where are we heading? Are we going to be led by authoritarian, by immigrant, far-right parties in Europe?
This is a very good question, and it requires a lot of thought, because I believe if you look at history, the last 5,000 years that are documented in history books and so forth, democracy, such as we have in the Western world, is a very short period of time. For the last 200 years, we've moved into a democracy. But the full democracy where everybody can vote is maybe only about 50 years old or less. And I think that it's not a very good system, democracy. I think the problem with democracy is that nobody's responsible. Nobody stands up and says, yes, I messed it up. That nobody will do. They will blame someone else. You can see it also with respect to the coronavirus and so forth. They will blame someone else. Nobody's responsible. Nobody's responsible for the fiscal deficits. Nobody's responsible for inflation. And I think that it will lead to an authoritarian regime. But I'm not sure the authoritarian regime will be a socialist regime or a far right, and maybe in the middle. Say in Europe, they will say Farage and the AfD in Germany are far right.
Le Pen in
For me, they're center. They're not far right. For me, do you understand? For me, far right is much more far right. We have to be very careful. But I think that the way we had a free society, this is going to disappear. We're going to be more controlled. And as a result of that, I also think that economic growth in the Western world will not be favorable.
And I'd like to also, while we pictured the general outlook in Europe and the world as well, where we're heading, and we've talked about the high debt as well, are you expecting some kind of crash coming after stagnation? Or is there any, because with these debts and stuff and the way that the things are, because we've seen in Europe, for example, immense amount of commitment for defense spending from 2.5 GDP or to 5% of the GDP. We're talking about like billions and billions of pounds and dollars. As at the same time, there's already debt. So we're adding more debt on to top of debt. I don't know what could happen. So how do you see it as someone who's experienced in the markets?
Based on history and based on how periods of monetary inflation ended, the end cannot be good. That is for sure. Number two, you talk about the crash. We have to define a crash because I wrote a report in November, December about the Trump top. There was a stock market reaching a high. That will be a high for many years to come. Now, in dollar terms, the stock market in the US is still at a high. But you measure it against gold, silver, platinum, it's way down. You measure it against the euro, it's also down 15%. So you could have a market which in dollar terms stays high, but in real terms, inflation adjusted goes down a lot. And the crash may not be a crash like 87 in one day, but a crash over many years. I just want to point out to you, in my view, and statistics show this, the young generation at 35 years of age, they have less money than their parents had, inflation adjusted, and they earn less than the parents did, inflation adjusted. In other words, the statistics of GDP show growth, but the reality is that most people have declining standards of living. And you live in the UK or you spend time in the UK, you can see it every day. The standards of living of the typical British household is going down. Same in the US.
Yeah, it's very visible. Even in 10 years of time in London, especially like seeing the austerity measures, I can visibly see in the streets of London that the conditions are changing. Almost 3 million people are going to food banks. So it's incredible. We're talking about the sixth biggest economy.
I agree with you. But the rich people, they actually benefited from this monetary printing. The very rich, the 0.1%.
What is the exit?
I'm not complaining. I'm also benefiting because I'm in the financial field. But I'm just saying, people who expect the crash, like in one day, 87, the market dropped 21% in one day. In Asia, many markets dropped 50% in one day. It may not happen because with money printing, it may happen through the currency or the depreciation in the purchasing power of people.
Last question, and I'll keep it very short and brief because you talked about the average individual. That my question is, and changing life conditions and life getting hard for them, how an average individual or household can escape out of this matrix that you've just pointed out?
I think that, in my view, and there may be times when it's worth it, but in general, I wouldn't borrow money. Avoid debts. And number two, I think if you have savings, you must put some of your savings, I'm not saying all, but some of your savings, you must put in precious metals. Now, you may say the price of gold is very high. That may be true, but if you look back at 1970 and today, the price of gold has kept your purchasing power. It's been a good store of value. It was at $35 an ounce at the time, and now it's more than 3,000. In general, it will keep its purchasing power. Now, the gold price has gone up a lot, but the platinum price has just started to move. And right now, I would buy platinum and not gold. I own gold, I own silver, but I'm still buying platinum.
Marc, thank you very much. It has been a pleasure to interview with you and having your insights, and hope to see you next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.